I'm Julie Zenner, and here's what's coming up this week on Almanac North. The governors of Wisconsin and Minnesota have issued orders urging citizens to stay home to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We'll talk about the brutal economic impact of the pandemic and if federal and state stimulus packages can help repair the damaged economy. Amid the gloom of the pandemic, a sliver of good news this week, the start of the Great Lakes shipping season. It's all coming up on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you for watching. Dennis Anderson is home tonight and our show was recorded on Thursday afternoon. Well, just like all of you, we're adapting to this new normal, which means Almanac North is going to look a little different until social distancing and stay-at-home restrictions are lifted. For our first topic, we are going to focus on the economic freefall caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And joining us in the studio, 6 feet away, is Tony Barrett, an economics professor emeritus from the College of St. Scholastica. And Tony, thank you for coming in. You were here 3 months ago for our annual economic panel. And at that time, stock market was soaring, unemployment was non-existent, the almost, full employment across the boards. Are you surprised that in such a short amount of time, the economy could really be brought to its knees by something like this?
Well, I have to say yes. I mean, this is such an unprecedented historic event for a worldwide pandemic that we have those. But the way that we've responded, governments around the world have responded, is unprecedented. So yes, I am surprised. But I hope Greg plays the clip where I did say there'd be a correction in the stock market. I just didn't expect it to be as radical and as soon.
Mm-hmm. You said it's unprecedented, but is it comparable at all to anything that we've seen or that you've seen historically?
Not really. You can go back and talk about the Black Death or things like that, but just in the modern era, no. The Great Depression evolved over a few years. The crash of 2007 and 8, that took months as the banks kind of fell slowly one by one. This has been so sudden. Nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're recording this on Thursday evening, and there's, I guess, an assumption that by the time this airs, Congress will have passed a $2 trillion economic stimulus package. Checks will be going out directly to households. There'll be opportunities for businesses to access some loans. Do you think that this is going to be enough to save the day in terms of helping individuals and families and businesses stay afloat?
It won't be enough because, one, we don't know how long this is going to last. And the need is so great. I mean, $2 trillion, that's great, but we're a $21 trillion economy, and we've shut down about a third of it. So this will certainly help. It'll hopefully help families bridge a period of time where they still have bills and they get a chance now to get to the other side of this in each region. Businesses may get a liquidity loan, some business interruption loans, and they'll survive, but there will still be severe economic pain throughout the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, we mentioned in the open that both Minnesota and Wisconsin governors have issued stay-at-home orders. All non-essential businesses are closed. What are the most vulnerable sectors as you look at our local economy right now and what they're possibly facing for weeks, if not months?
Well, in the short run, retail and the tourism industry in Duluth are going to have an awful period of time. It's fortunate in a sense that this is happening in March, April, and May, as opposed to June, July, and August. I mean, if our tourism industry was faced with this then, and I'm assuming it'll be done by, say, June, And if that's wrong, it's just going to get awful. I mean, you have all these restaurants that are closed. I mean, there's zero revenue. Retail, businesses are closed. The mall's closed. There are businesses that will not reopen. That's just all there is to it. There's going to be bars, restaurants that won't reopen just because they don't have the cash reserves to get through maybe a 2-month period of no income.
And that's even with the loans that they're going to have some access to.
I just don't believe those loans will be enough and be fast enough and get allocated in the right places to solve all the problems. They'll certainly solve some. They'll certainly get some businesses through, but there will be some that won't make it.
What about the most resilient sectors in our region?
Government. I mean, the government sector.
There's always money for government, right?
The healthcare sector, though ironically we read in the paper about layoffs at some of our healthcare places because people aren't going to the doctor waiting for this epidemic to hit. So those two industries are solid. Iron ore will start to struggle if the recession gets more severe. I mean, car companies are already closing down for a couple of weeks. That means less demand for steel. That means less demand for our taconite. We really don't have anything other than the healthcare sector and the government sector that's impervious to this.
So many people, the new unemployment numbers came out this week. So many new people entering that market right now. Is there a danger that the system could be overwhelmed by all of the new people applying?
That's an excellent question, and I would say give me until Monday to answer that. We're going to have another 3 million applying for unemployment benefits this week. We'll probably have another 2 or 3 million the week after that. If that becomes a backlog, it could be a nightmare. And because we're trying to get payments to people. We're using the unemployment infrastructure, if you call it that, the bureaucratic structure that does unemployment, to deliver a lot of these checks. It better hold up.
We talked right off the bat about how quickly this hit our economy. Once people are allowed to go back to work and businesses are allowed to reopen, what do you see as the trajectory for maybe getting things back to some state of normal? Is it going to be a pretty fast rebound?
That's my opinion. The question hinges on how you and I respond. I mean, I'm 68, I have asthma. Even if the governor says I can go out, will I? Will my wife and I go to the other place or Applebee's or something like that? Or will we still be cautious? Will people go out and have a splurge because they've been sitting at home? Or are they still going to be cautious? I think being good Americans, we'll get back to consuming. It'll be different though. Retail's going to be different. Way more people are finding the pleasures of online ordering, and they're going to stick with it. And retail won't bounce back. I don't know how tourism will bounce back. Let's assume in Minnesota this passes in June, July. Well, that gives people in the cities 6 weeks to get up here. And will they want to? It's impossible to know in advance because there's no precedent for this. I tend to be pretty optimistic that American consumers will bounce back, and that drives the economy.
Do you think in some ways the cure here could be worse than the disease itself?
That is a great question to debate. Certainly living here in Duluth, where we've had 3 cases in our county, I believe, there might be a 4th one today. Looking at the economic costs we're incurring, it looks like the costs are greater than the health care benefits. But who knows? In 3 weeks, I might be in the hospital on a ventilator. We don't know. The costs, the problem we have is the healthcare solution and the economic solution couldn't be more opposite. You simply, if you're going to try and flatten out the curve, you have to shut down the economy. If you want to support the economy, you have to allow people to go out and mingle and be in crowds. Our government seems to be making the choice that it's better to take the economic hurt. They're, for the most part, smart people. People are making that decision around the world.
Well, for for now, businesses are looking at creative ways to deliver goods and services. People are trying to figure out
Yep.
where they fit in all of this, and we really appreciate you coming out and sharing some of your insights.
Well, and hopefully everyone stays healthy, and hopefully we look back on this in a month or two going, what were we thinking?
All right, let's hope
Okay.
so. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
At a time when we are all wondering what upcoming days will bring, it's comforting to find bits of normalcy in the world. We found that this week with word of the first ship movements of the 2020 Great Lakes shipping season. Almanac North producer Greg Grell interviewed Jason Rohn of the Duluth Seaway Port Authority via webcam.
Jason, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So we're at an exciting time of the year. The port is opening up for the season. Tell us about the first ship movement so far this week in the harbor.
It is definitely an exciting time of year. The Burns Harbor made its way out of the Superior entry in the wee hours on Sunday morning, and that kicked it off. Burns Harbor was actually the last vessel into the port for winter layup to conclude the 2019 season, and she was the first one out to begin the 2020 season. So she was on her way in the wee hours Sunday morning, and then a few more vessels have made their way out of the port in the days since then. So we're underway. And then with Wednesday's opening of the Soo locks, that opened the waterway for upbound traffic, and several ships locked through on Wednesday right after the locks opened up. So yeah, going both directions right now, and everything's moving as it should be.
So one thing unusual, different than last year is the lake is pretty much wide open. We're not really going to have much ice problem this year, are we?
That's true. So far, so good. The Coast Guard tells me that we are at a level of ice right now that is usually more commensurate with the second week of April. So things are definitely progressing really well on the ice front. There is still some ice moving around the lake, and some ships are having some tangles with that ice, but nothing too major at this point. And the Coast Guard is doing its thing with the assets it has to make sure that shipping moves as freely as it can. But definitely looking a lot better than we were last year at this time in terms of ice coverage.
So we know it's very early, Jason, but what's the early outlook like for the shipping season?
You know, with seemingly everything in our world changing by the hour right now with COVID, it's difficult to really speculate on what total tonnages could be at the end of the season or anything like that. But so far, everything seems to be, mostly on schedule. Things are moving as they normally move. So it's been a pretty normal start to the shipping season, I guess, in that sense, in terms of the ships getting on their way and the tonnages moving. And, at this point, everybody's hoping that we can continue to do business as usual as much as possible. I think when you look at the maritime shipping industry as a whole, it puts the pasta on your plate and the phone in your pocket and the car in your garage. So it's a critical piece of cargo movement for North America. And we really, all of the industries involved and all of the agencies involved are doing everything they can to meet the challenge and keep that cargo moving as close to normal as possible at this point. So obviously time will tell whether there are larger effects of COVID-19 or anything else that may arise over the course of the season as it relates to tonnage. But so far, things seem to be off to a pretty good start.
Now, we talked, or you mentioned before we started the interview, that the Coast Guard is really in charge of any COVID-19 related activity. To your knowledge, besides just the unknown about how the economy is going to be affected, is there any specific rules or anything changed because of COVID-19, say amongst the crew, or how they interact in the port, that type of thing?
Definitely. Safety is the number one priority. Safety of the crews and the vessel operators, safety of the people shoreside that are helping the ships. So the Coast Guard and Centers for Disease Control are the lead agencies on it as it relates to COVID-19. And they definitely have been working 24/7 on preparations and procedures to try to ensure the greatest amount of safety possible. Those procedures really run the gamut of things in terms of not only the availability for crew and captain to embark or disembark from the vessels when they can, where they can, certain restrictions on that. and required reporting for vessels who may have crews and crew members who have potentially become symptomatic or had exposure to someone who may be symptomatic. There are procedures for mandated reporting in advance at various command centers for the Coast Guard and also with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Centers for Disease Control. So they're mandated to report in advance if anybody is symptomatic or if anybody's had any exposure. And that happens even before any of the ship inspectors board vessels in port. So all of those things are in place, even down to certain documents, weather documents being emailed to ship captains as opposed to delivered to them in hard copies and things like that. So definitely a lot of procedures and protocols in place to try to ensure safety for everyone involved.
So it's fair to say that the start of this shipping season is unique. This isn't like a typical season.
No, it's unprecedented in that regard for sure.
So I know it's early, but right now we're worried about, of course, what's going to happen with the economy. So we've got our big three, the iron ore, coal, and grain. And I know that we've been doing more and more wind turbine as well. Any long range projections right now that you're hearing about how any of those cargoes could be impacted?
So speaking specifically to the wind cargo, we do have several wind shipment deliveries scheduled for the Port of Duluth Superior again this season. We're actually, prior to COVID-19, looking forward to potentially another record-breaking season for that particular type of cargo. And we certainly hope to still be able to achieve that despite the outbreak of this pandemic. So that will be kind of a wait and see. It's on the schedule. None of that was scheduled to arrive before May anyway. So at this point, everything's still scheduled as planned. As it relates to movement of iron ore and coal and some of the other major cargoes that we move through the port, the first shipment out was a load of iron ore, and we'll certainly have coal moving as well. So obviously all eyes are on the economy and what the effects of this might be. Certainly the optimistic side of things hopes that maybe the nation can be up and running sooner rather than later, but obviously not in a way that puts anybody at increased risk. So, unfortunately, about the best thing I can tell you is, like everything else, it's a little bit wait and see at this point.
No, early on there was maybe some confusion when the president talked about the potential impact on international shipping cargoes, and I think that was overstated. Is there going to be any impact as far as international shipping from, say, Europe to the United States?
What we know at this point is that the Montreal Lake Ontario section of the St. Lawrence Seaway will not open until April 1st this year. And that was actually related to the Lake Ontario outflow levels, not COVID-19. So no overseas vessels will be arriving in the Port of Duluth Superior prior to that date. So that's the first element that's in place when it comes to international shipping, is that the Seaway won't actually open to international shipping until April 1st this year. Beyond that, it will be strictly with the Coast Guard and Centers for Disease Control, and I guess the binational government bodies as well, to make any declarations about what will happen with international shipping. But at this point, everything is still on schedule.
Now, port watchers have been really looking forward to the 2020 season because Great Lakes passenger ship traffic was scheduled to return to the Great Lakes. Any word at all right now on what impact COVID might have on that?
Right. Obviously, with cruise shipping being in the news with COVID-19, I mean, they're closely tied together at this point. So what we know right now regarding the Great Lakes cruising is that there is still a cruise ship scheduled to come to this port in June of this year. It has not been removed from the schedule yet. At this point, the government restrictions were for cruise ships exceeding 500 passengers. This cruise ship would have fewer than 500 passengers. At this point, it's still on the schedule to arrive. However, like everything else, I think to be determined on that.
What about the outlook for the port itself? Any major construction projects, dredging, things like that on the tap for this season?
Yeah, it's definitely set to be another exciting year for the port itself in terms of those kinds of projects. When the Port Authority was awarded the MARAD grant in February, that put us in position to be able to begin construction on a 56,000 square foot rail served warehouse, a new warehouse at the Clure Public Marine Terminal. So in addition to that, that project will also help us rehabilitate about 1,700 lineal feet of dock wall as well on berths 10 and 11. So with that funding, we'll be able to embark on some projects that'll be great for the Clear terminal and great for the region. They will help, those projects, especially the warehouse, will help provide greater cargo flexibility, more cargo space, obviously, and the ability for local producers and cargo owners to be able to have some cost savings in their supply chain.
And finally, recently, the Minnesota Department of Transportation announced that they were going to put the so-called can of worms rebuild project on hold. And I know that impacts the port because of the heavy lift cargoes. Can you talk about that a bit, Jason?
Late last year, we heard word that the Garfield Avenue portion of the project, which was specifically dedicated to the oversized and overweight cargoes, for instance, wind cargo, was going to be deferred anyway, regardless of this most recent deferral announcement. So that aspect of the project we knew had been deferred. Obviously, the recent news that the project largely as a whole will be deferred was an add-on to that. I think from a port standpoint, we will continue to move cargo just the same way we've moved cargo over the last few years. The reality is that this deferral is not going to impede us from moving cargo. We'll just be moving it the same way we have over the last few years. But what we're looking forward to when the project is complete is more efficient cargo movement through the port and the benefits that will come from, I guess, having that can of worms emptied, so to speak.
All right. Well, Jason, we really hope for a good shipping season and really appreciate your time today. This has been Jason Roan, the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
The governors in Minnesota and Wisconsin both signed orders this week advising residents to stay at home except for specific reasons. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers' Safer at Home order restricts travel in the Badger State to try to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Here's an excerpt from Governor Evers' announcement.
Now, I recognize that a lot of folks out there have had questions about the order, and I recognize this is a difficult time for our state and our country. At the end of the day, folks, we are all in this together. And during the most difficult times, we are called upon to remember our Wisconsin values of kindness, compassion, empathy, and respect. So to that end, I'm going to continue to ask for your help, not only to remember these values, but to do your part to keep our friends, our family, and frankly, most importantly, our healthcare workers and communities safe. We need folks to take the Safer at Home order I signed today seriously. Folks do not need special permission to leave their homes. You can still go outdoors, walk your dog, go to the doctor, go to the pharmacist, and get other and groceries, and get all the supplies that you need. But this is important. We need to have folks limit their interactions to the same people, not different small groups. Shrinking your circle of interactions will help prevent the spread of COVID-19 to make sure our healthcare system doesn't become overwhelmed. Unfortunately, that means no potlucks, no play dates, and no dinner parties. And if you have to leave your home, please stay 6 feet away from other people. As I also mentioned yesterday, some businesses will continue to be allowed to operate, so no need to run to the grocery store and hoard food. Healthcare operations, grocery stores, pharmacies, gas station, banks, critical infrastructure, and businesses that ship and deliver groceries and foods and goods directly to residences, among others, will continue to stay open. Over the past several days, we've been working with public health experts, local governments, stakeholders, business leaders, to determine how we can best keep folks safe while continuing to provide the essential services and keep our economy strong. If you have questions about whether your business is essential or non-essential, please review the Safer at Home order And if you have any additional questions, please visit wedc.org/essentialbusiness for other details.
As the experts advise, we all need to heed the warnings and restrict our exposure to others to keep the virus from spreading too quickly. If you are feeling ill, Essentia Health and St. Luke's both have hotlines. They're answering 24/7 to help you. Take advantage of those and other resources as we get through this crisis one day at a time. And while you're at home, keep up with Almanac North on our social media channels. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and visit the WDSC website for program updates and more about coronavirus and what we're doing here at the station. Stay healthy, everyone. For the crew here at Almanac North, I'm Julie Zenner. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.